Good morning, everyone. This is Froskurinn here with Kelsey Moser from The Score, and this is episode 2 of Reactionary Play. Again, this show is a daily review of the LPL, and today we have two best of threes. We had Team WE versus Energy Pacemaker All, and then we had LGD Gaming versus the QG Reapers. So, Kelsey, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's really early, and I'm very tired. So let's kind of break it right down into it. I want to talk about WE to start off. Obviously, they won the series. They went 2-1 against EPA. They lost the first game, and it looked a little bit scary there after the first game if W was actually going to be able to win it, but then they came back in Game 2 and Game 3, specifically on the back of Condi and Shie. Their individual performances I felt really stood out. Of course, Mystic had some good games as well, but you were actually really high during the offseason on Team W's acquisitions in terms of their roster. So can you kind of go through, why you felt that way and some of these roster acquisitions that I'm speaking about?
So specifically, the pickups that I liked were 957, the new top laner, and Zero, the support player. The reason why I liked those wasn't necessarily because I thought 957 and Zero were going to be like super hard carry, the best players in their role or anything, but I thought that it showed that WE was identifying where they had weaknesses in their roster, and I felt that Aluka's very limited champion pool was definitely a strain on some of their drafting. It was definitely a strain on their playstyle, and I felt like Conan had issues with some of the more engaged supports like Nautilus or getting caught out frequently, so that was my feeling on that.
And how do you actually feel about Zero and 957's performances kind of in their first set of the LPL?
I think that, so first of all, I heard that Aluka used to kind of be the captain, and 957 was the captain of Team WE Future, so I assumed that they brought him in to assume that role. And it showed Game 1, they were very inactive, and even though 957 got like a 100 CS lead on Gimgoon by the end, all he did was split push, even when Energy Pacemaker all were crashing in on their base, so it was just really disoriented. Second game, there was much better play from Condi overall, and I felt like 957 did a better job of getting involved in teamfights. So if he can do that, then I think and play more teamfight-oriented champions like the Lysandra and the Hecarim, I think that he'll be able to do well for this team and be an upgrade over Aluka. Zero, I think he was alright. He wasn't the old Zero that we're used to, who's constantly making these big engagement plays.
So overall, do you think...
But he was pretty strong. Sorry.
No, excuse me. Overall, do you think that the roster was a success? Like, do you think that this Team WE iteration is a stronger version of Team WE from last split?
I think it's still too early to tell that, but...
That's a little bit concerning, don't you think? Considering that team was almost relegated and had to fight their way back through promotions.
I think that's definitely concerning. I think that this team has a better shot of being more teamwork oriented, if that makes sense. Okay. Obviously, Spirit was a very, very, very strong talent. So when you watch WE games, it was pretty much like Spirit trying to go solo 5 people on the enemy team. Whereas I think that sold short some of the strengths of Shia and Mystic. I don't think Shia and Mystic are like all-star players, but I think that they have specific strengths. Like we've seen, if you get Shia ahead in lane, he can do really well in duels. We've seen that Mystic has certain champions he's really strong at in teamfights. So I think that if this team can collaborate better, they can play more as a unit, and they might actually be able to be stronger than even the lineup with Spirit, as powerful as Spirit is.
Okay, so let's look at the other side of the coin in Energy Pacemaker All. Obviously, there's not much known about this roster. Energy Pacemaker has kind of a sordid history with the LPL. I like to call them the coast of the LPL. They've kind of been bouncing in and out of promotions and relegations kind of back to back. Typically, they sit at the bottom tier of LPL when they do manage to crawl their way back in. What do you think about this roster? Are there any key talents that really stick out to you? And do you think that maybe Team WE is stronger than kind of their previous split performance, but it maybe wasn't as well demonstrated since EPA might be stronger than people realize? I mean, they looked pretty decent in 5v5s.
I think that overall, WE's players are going to be stronger than Energy Pacemaker Alls, but it's just both of these teams kind of need to figure out some sort of coordination or where those strengths lie and how they want to utilize them a bit better. Energy Pacemaker all, I see their strengths being like Jezza's playmaking
Talking
and
about the support.
yes, and the mid laner Republic seems to be a bit stronger than their previous mid laner and probably their best source for carry. The way they played in the LSPL is that they would rely on Gimgoon to kind of carry, but Gimgoon isn't really a carry player. He's a little bit better at tanks. So I think that moving, let's see, Republic more into the carry role in the forefront and putting Gimgoon on a more supportive role might be beneficial to them.
Okay, and where do you think that Energy Pacemaker, I mean, if you had to predict or project how they're going to end the split or what they're going to amount to, where would you put them? Are you going to put them in playoffs, or are they going to get better? Is there potential in this roster, or is this simply going to be another Energy Pacemaker story where, unfortunately, they sit on the bottom half of the LPL until they're relegated?
I think based on today's performance, it's going to be between WE and Energy Pacemaker all to get the fourth spot, and I think right now WE have a little bit higher upside.
Okay, so let's now move on to the second best of two, which of course was what we talked about yesterday as the featured matchup of the week. It was going to be the QG Reapers versus LGD Gaming. Now, if you guys haven't seen it, it's a 2-0 decisively by the QG Reapers. They pretty much, I think the joke was that Marn certainly understands how Dyrus feels now.
Yes, something like that.
He was camped relentlessly. He was dove on an inhib tower. I think he was 0-4 within the first 20 minutes of the game. Repeated ganks by Swift. Swift looked like a monster that game. The QG Reapers looked very intelligent. Like, normally the QG Reapers, they don't play very well in the beginning of the games, but this time around they were really quick on their feet in terms of getting Swift active in the early game, taking advantage pre-15 minutes, and then snowballing quite effectively. They looked like their old LSPL days.
Yes, I think QG had a little bit more decisiveness to them. I do want to highlight the fact that it did take repeated attempts to kind of get the game off the ground for them. Swift spent a lot of time camping, and it looked like he was severely falling behind Amy and farm. The problem is that LGD just completely did nothing about it, right? They had this opportunity, they had this window where they could make something happen and they could punish Swift for spending so much time sitting next to a lane, but they just chose to do nothing. There's no better way of putting that.
Do you think that fault or this passive play rests on Amy as the jungler? I mean, obviously he's in probably the most proactive role in terms of impacting the early game, or do you think that this is a shot calling issue? I mean, it's hard to say because you're not sitting in comms with them, but right. Looking at the players' faces on screens, it looked like LGD had shut down, that no one was saying anything, and that I think really reflected in their play. Like you said, it was a very passive game where they just passively lost it.
Yeah, and frankly, I feel like that's been their problem since Worlds, is they've just completely shut down and they haven't done anything. LGD Gaming was the team that had the shortest average game time in the LPL. They had the shortest game time in lane swaps. They had the most lane swaps. This team had plans. They made proactive movements, and then suddenly things started to go poorly for them at Worlds, and it just seemed like they completely shut off everything that used to make them strong and unique. So I think that it's in part Amy's fault probably, but it also comes down to, well, the first game, yes, he was on more of a farm-oriented champion, but they didn't coordinate the vision to compensate for that either. They didn't try to put more pressure on Wayless to control the game like they used to. They even went to, in the second game, a more high movement, high mobility oriented style with Wayless on Ahri. They put Imp on Ezreal. They put Amy on Kindred. That's more in LGD's wheelhouse, but they still just seem to passively lose the game and not do much of anything.
Let's kind of focus on Wayless in particular, because I feel a lot of people have this perception of him since his kind of failure at Worlds. Obviously, he had a fairly mediocre performance, and kind of coming back into the LPL, he played two champions tonight, Varus and Ahri. Ahri, obviously, his signature champion. He has a ton of games on Varus, so these are two champions that he's very comfortable on. Like you said, he just didn't really do anything, and Is this what we're to expect from Wayless? Do you think we have enough data now to say that this is the new identity of Wayless, if we're ever going to see him kind of come back into his rookie performance when he first got into LGD?
Yeah, and we saw a significant portion of the time where he was ramping up and he was continuing to develop, I think, through a good part of summer. It's just that right now we have no reason to believe, like, we thought maybe roster changes and the addition of a coach would help them kind of refine themselves, get more confident. Scrims are allegedly going a little bit better for them, but the first time we see them with all these changes, with allegedly more initiative or thoughts that maybe they can get more motivation from their top laner, that they're all saying that they want to win this year really at Worlds, and it just wasn't there. It's the same thing. So I think that it has to be a systemic shot calling or coordination issue that they just haven't resolved yet.
Okay. And kind of finally, last thing that we really want to touch on is flipping back to the QG Reapers. I mean, obviously LGD had a pretty poor performance in this set. Do you think that kind of takes away some of the QG Reapers' victory? Or as the casters were talking about on stream, give credit where credit is due. Is this a new iteration of the QG Reapers that people really need to look out for? And are they the #1 team in the LPL?
I think that this QG, like I said before, they had windows where they were trying to get something to happen and it wasn't working, so it looked a bit more like their old self, and LGD could have capitalized and gotten into the game there, but at the same time they showed an ability to understand where they needed to pressure the lane. They had Marin, right, who, if you watch old SK Telecom games, like the only series they lost in summer was due to a top camp. Marin himself has said that it disrupts him and his ability to communicate a little bit better if he has a lot of jungle pressure. So I think that knowing this and identifying that this is something that might be able to destabilize LGD is something, and correctly going there. Also playing to their strengths, putting Doinb on mobility, assassin-oriented champion and getting him ahead. Swift being a lot more creative in his pathing is something that we haven't seen out of QG for, frankly, a long time. So I would say that this is a better QG than we saw last summer. So it's a mix.
Here's the final question. Is this iteration of QG better than the playoff iteration of LGD and better than the regional qualifier iteration of EDG?
I don't think so. I think there's still some windows in the early game where teams could come in and manipulate them better if they had a more proactive early game plan. I think right now in the meta, watching Europe, watching Korea, watching China, having a good early game plan and knowing how you want to get ahead has given teams an edge, really. Honestly, that has almost completely decided most of the games I've seen in the new season.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been episode 2 of Reactionary Play. Again, we will be doing a daily LPL breakdown, which means that there will be 4 videos every single week. Thank you, Kelsey. Do you have any closing statements?
Nope. Hopefully we can see some increasingly interesting games as the week continues.
Excellent. Cheers.